Uh, it was only what was available, and if anybody knows about the Writers' Place in Kansas City, it's a nonprofit literary arts organization that promotes writing and readings and that sort of thing throughout the greater Kansas City area. And it used to have a great space in this old stone castle in Midtown Kansas City. And the fridge was always stocked with wine and stuff for events. And this crazy group of poets came in from all over the country and didn't understand that what was in the fridge was not theirs. So not only did we really have to, at the end of the night, scrape up the money to pay for the space, we also, I ended up having to reimburse the Writers' Place for everything consumed.
Well,
but you know, hey, it was a great time. We had a good time.
I'm sure you've been repaid in karma, but all right.
I think it ran out today.
Maybe so. Could you, before we get started, before I ask you any questions, because there may be some people on here that don't know you as well as I do, could you just tell us a little bit about, well, tell us the names of some of your books so people know before we get started.
Okay. My first full-length collection was called Talking to Shadows. It's an old book. It's out of print. I think I have one or two beat-up copies, and that's about it. My book was put out by, the first book was put out by Main Street Rag Press, or Main Street Rag Publishing Company, rather. And I had kind of helped start the Main Street Rag Literary Journal and helped Scott Douglas get that off the ground and running. I didn't have a lot to do with the actual publishing company and press and anything like that. We originally released Talking to Shadows as a chapbook back in, gosh, 1997, 98, somewhere in there. And it was poorly produced and full of errors, and it was this book that Main Street Rag ever tried to put together. All the mistakes are mine. And so anyway, I re-released that. Scott and I felt like it was important to do that. So we re-released it. I added a bunch of new poems, turned it into a full-length collection, but kept the title. And now it has an ISBN number and, you know, is sitting in the Library of Congress and all that kind of stuff. My next book was out through Spartan Press as part of their pop poetry series. And it was called Nobody Steals the Towels from a Motel 6. And John Dorsey and Jason Reberg know why. And then my last book was called Survival Tips for the Pending Apocalypse. And it is available wherever you buy fine literature. It's also available wherever you buy bad literature. But yeah, it's available. You can get it. It's out there. If you go to ShawnPavey.com, click on Buy My Books. What I have available to sell is available at that link. It's a secure Square site. Anybody can log on and do that. That's the end of my shameless self-promotion. But yeah, those are my three books: Talking to Shadows, Nobody Steals the Towels from a Motel 6, and Survival Tips for the Pending Apocalypse.
All right. And with that, like, I wanted you to talk to me about how you first got started as a writer, and point B of that same question, you've talked to me a lot about the influence of Chuck Sullivan. Could you tell me how you got started and tell me about that influence and how it really impacted you early on? Okay.
Well, I've been writing as long as I can remember. In the second grade, if we got our work finished early, there was a type in the back of the room and in the back of the classroom. And so I would always try to get my work done early so I could go back and play on the typewriter. And I would write these really macabre detective murder mysteries in the second grade. And they were terrible. And my teacher was really concerned that there was something going on at home, and there wasn't. It was just me being a weird kid. So I did that. I think I started writing poems more seriously in high school, where I actually, did things like rewrite them and edit them and try to make them better, and not think that just because it was on the page it was good. And then I had a really wonderful summer that between my junior and senior year of high school, where I spent most of the summer, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 weeks, summer education programs. And the first one I went to for poetry, and spent 2 weeks working with Heather Ross Miller at Pfeiffer College in North Carolina, and really worked on, not only getting a poem down, and once you've got it, how do you spin that into something good? So I got to do that, and then I went to another 6-week program called the North Carolina Governor's School. And I went there for instrumental music, but I kept skipping my chamber music rehearsals to go to Chuck Sullivan's poetry readings, and they were going to kick me out because I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do, because I was there for instrumental music. Let me take a couple seconds to talk about the North Carolina Governor's School. It's a fantastic program. It's been under siege the last several years as the budget-cutting Republicans are in there trying to cut anything that would spark original thought. But the Governor's School is a program where gifted and talented rising juniors and seniors would have their major area of study. Mine was instrumental music. I played oboe at the time. And, but I also took philosophy classes and psychology classes. So everybody had their area 1, which mine was music. And then area 2 was philosophy, and area 3 was psychology or sociology itself. And then there were a bunch of electives and all sorts of stuff that we could get into. And if there was trouble to be found, we found it, and it was good. But it was that working with Chuck Sullivan and his recognition that maybe I had something. And he was very encouraging and very kind and very generous, to a point that when I went back to school, I had this summer of this great intellectual exploration, and it was fantastic. I'd never had anything like that. I'd never once in my life been in a room full of people who were as smart or smarter than me. Most of the time I just coasted through school because it just came naturally to me. But I went to Governor's School, and they challenged me, and they challenged my preconceptions, and they challenged everything. And it was just this fantastic experience. But I met Chuck there. And so I went back to high school. I was having a hard time readjusting because I was no longer in Hogwarts. I was now back in Mount Pleasant, North Carolina, where everybody drove to school in a pickup truck, and they had gun racks with guns in them. And but nobody thought anything about it, because that's what you do in rural North Carolina. And so I heard from one of my Governor's School friends that Chuck was going to be at a neighboring school, they didn't have money to take him to my school. So they sent him to the rich kid school. And so I got permission to skip school for 2 days to go to another school to take a 2-day poetry workshop with Chuck. And he and I really hit it off at that point. He invited me over to his house. We'd shoot baskets, and we just, having somebody who almost to a day was my dad's age, really kind of taking me under their wing and talking to me about what it is to be a poet, what it is to write a poem, and really helping me craft my own work into something that even at the time was passable. Um, that relationship was very influential on me early on, and most of my early poems, no surprise, were blatant copies of Chuck Sullivan poems, which is what we do when we find somebody interested in us. We try to copy them. So that's that relationship, and he and I still stay in touch. He's written blurbs for my first 2 books. Sent me a really nice letter when I sent him a copy of the last one. So we're still in touch and still maintaining that relationship. But he, if it weren't for him, none of this would have happened. I'd have probably given up.
You'd probably be a much wealthier man today.
Probably, or maybe a very unhappy one. I don't know.
Quite possibly. But that leads me into my next question, which is
Sure.
Obviously that explains a lot of the roots of your writing. And you've written, or you put out 3 books, and the work changes over the years. And we hope that we grow during that whole process. We hope that we're always growing. Otherwise, for me, give me a shovel and some dirt if I'm not doing anything anymore,
Right.
But so my question to you is, like, how, if I'm sure that you've seen the change in your own work, how has your work changed over the years?
Oddly enough, I think it's become a little less dark, much less angsty. My early work is full of angst, and embarrassingly so. But I think it was Wallace Stevens who said that, after somebody asked him what he felt about, he went to Yale or Harvard or one of those schools, and they found some of his undergraduate poetry, and they were going to republish it. And somebody asked him about that in an interview, and his response, I just think it's classic. One's early work gives one the creeps.
That's pretty good. Although maybe today's things with the cops pulling you over will bring some of that angst back.
No, that's just me being stupid.
Outside of Chuck Sullivan, like when you were attending readings, or when you were reading material for the first time as a young poet, can you tell us who some of your other influences were at that time?
Well, I went to the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Went through their creative writing program. So yeah, basically their educational canon, the English department canon. All of those folks were an influence on me. I identified very closely with the English Romantic poets, specifically with Keats more than the rest of them, just because he died so young and wrote such amazing things at such a young age, and died never knowing how important he was. And I just find that tragic and heartbreaking. But yeah, I mean, so the English Romantics were influential to me. Wallace Stevens was influential. A.R. Ammons, you can't be from North Carolina and not love A.R. Ammons. He was so supportive of everybody at whatever stage that they were. He would pop up at readings and coffee shops in weird little towns in North Carolina, just to hear people read, just to hear the poems. He was a pretty fantastic guy. But Galway Canal has always resonated with me. I know he's a bit of a jerk, and they're trying to cancel him a little bit right now, but his work always resonated with me.
Well,
Eliot's in there. Pound, not so much. I want to go through the cantos with a machete. But yeah, so I'm not as big a fan of Pound, which is okay because he was a crazy Nazi. Um, but gosh,
You were a Karoosh.
Yusef Kumanyaka, Seamus Heaney, and I realized that a lot of my early reading list was primarily men, and primarily white men. So I've really, over the last decade or so, really made a conscious effort to read other folks and to read other perspectives. Really getting into the work of the poet AI. Are you familiar with her?
Yeah.
She's amazing. You know, Ocean Vuong's work. You and I were talking about him the other day. Yeah, he's just brilliant for being so young. And trying to read more of like Nikki Giovanni and Lucille Clifton and some of those really powerhouse poets that I just didn't get exposed to as much in college. I mean, I had great professors and they tried to give us what they could, but I think it's important for somebody who loves poetry, wants to write poetry, to read all the poetry they can get their hands on. And so my job now is to fill the holes, the diversity holes that were lacking in my education.
Well, no, I can't agree with you more. I'll read any book of poetry someone hands to me, at least for a couple of poems anyway.
Right.
I know that Bob Phillips is tuned in here. He was, Bob was friends with Etheridge Knight when Etheridge lived in Toledo.
Wow.
And so I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I think maybe if you want to read a couple of poems, that would be awesome. And my question is this: like, you have been influenced by people, as we all have, and hopefully, your work is an influence to other people that are out there now. What would you like people that read your work to take away from the experience, ideally?
That's a good question, John. I hope people come away from looking at the work that I've done and at least feel on some level that it's true, even if it's a bold-faced lie. I try to write a lot about my own experience. I've been trying to get out of that a little bit, but I hate using the word confessional, but I think I do kind of fall into that category at times. But I also like to think that I'm not just complaining, or I'm not just talking about how hard things are sometimes, but that I'm relating a universal experience that I'll talk about a very specific thing and then just kind of and out from there and try to bring it into the human experience of moving through the world every day. Maybe I think a poet's job is to notice stuff. That's what we're supposed to do, and I hope that the things that I notice resonate with other people, that they maybe notice them in the same way, or maybe they have never noticed them in that way ever, or maybe they've never noticed that thing. I'm rambling, but I hope that makes sense. It's a very nebulous answer to a nebulous. Well, it's a very specific question.
I'm with you, and I appreciate the answer. I know that that question can go a lot of ways, the answer there. When I go, I hope they just put on my tombstone, he was a good listener.
Well, John, you are.
That'd be good enough. But with that, I'm just going to have you read a couple of poems, whatever you like. And then when you're done, I'm going to instruct everybody or have everybody turn their microphones back on so maybe they can ask you some questions about the poems they heard.
Okay. Well, I'm talking about my books. Now I'm going to read something that isn't in any of them. If I can get to it, hold on. Here we go.
Is it that 36-page poem you just wrote?
That's true.
The 36 page? No, we're not going to do that one. As a matter of fact, I haven't written that one yet. This is, music has always been very important to me since I was a young person. And John, I know you were wanting to talk about that a little bit. But one of the things I've done over the last several years is pick up guitar and try to learn to play it as well as I can, and have been going to lessons for the last 4 or 5 years because I apparently am a lousy teacher. So I've been studying with people who know what they're doing, and my latest teacher is a guy by the name of Jason Vivoni, Kansas City slide guitar legend, and I am just learning so much from that guy. He lets me explore and do all that stuff, and then will give me exercises to help take me into another direction. He's been really great. But one of the things that he and I've been working on is learning how to play, because he's a blues player. I love blues, so we speak that language together. But I'm also trying to learn how to play, Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry, which is a slippery little beast of a tune and really difficult to play. So this is called On Learning How to Play Chuck Berry's Johnny Be Good on Guitar. The first thing to remember when approaching this material is that the E is silent. The next most important thing to remember is that the song is recorded in the key of B flat because Chuck got tired of his piano player bitching about how guitar players always wanted to play an E or G or D or A because it's easier to figure out on the fretboard, but it's hell on piano trying to remember whether to play the black keys or the white ones. The third most important thing to remember when playing all those slippery little slides and bends and hammer-ons and double stops is that this is the way he played it that day. Fourth, but equally as important as anything, one must remember to rest the index finger on the B and E strings on the 6th fret while the thumb rests above the bass E. And this most important thing to remember when attempting to play Johnny Be Good is that to get it, to really get it, one should learn every lick that T-Bone Walker ever played and then come back and start over. Thank you. But the idea behind that is that Chuck learned every lick he's ever played from T-Bone Walker. So if you learn T-Bone Walker, you can figure out Chuck Berry. But to learn T-Bone Walker, you also have to learn Robert Johnson. And to learn Robert Johnson, it just keeps going back, into like the late 1800s where you're dealing with W.C. Handy and those sort of New Orleans brass band composers, because that's where all the blues guys, that was the music they were hearing. So they were trying to pick up these big band moves on, rickety old wooden guitars. So I don't know. I just find that interesting. And I think you do the same thing with poetry. I think when you start getting into contemporary poets and you try to figure out who influenced them, and so you read those folks. So that's when you get into the Hayden Carruths or the Wallace Stevenses whatever. And you keep going back and back and back, and the next thing you know, you're hanging out with Shakespeare and Marlowe. Yeah, for me, learning the thing, I need to learn where the thing came from. And then once I learn that, I need to learn where that thing came from. And I'll shut up now.
Actually, Shawn, there's a lot of scholarship that says that Chuck was actually really trying to mimic the piano player Lonnie Johnson.
Right.
T-Bone clearly would have been like the big, sexy gunfighter hero of the day, probably the first of that era. But yeah, what he was really doing, allegedly, was trying to mimic a piano player, which is interesting, cross.
Well, that's why he played in weird keys.
Yeah. But I mean, what do you think of that kind of idea of, a guitar player riffing off a piano player, poets maybe ripping off.
And that piano player was ripping off W.C. Handy horn compositions, back when they were inventing all this stuff, they were using any source they could find to get them where they needed to go.
All right. I'll let you dig out another poem there, Shawn. I just want to say Shakespeare and Marlowe are a whole nother dark alley that,
Aren't they though? This is a new one. Should be coming out in Rye Whiskey Review at some point. They've got it. They said they're going to print it. It's called Letter to My Poet Friends in Quarantine. Can we write enough poems about Django Reinhardt? It's a question I keep asking myself, knowing if you were here, brothers and sisters, you would have treaties at the ready and in triplicate. So when I hear those thin, scratchy recordings, when I hear those thin, scratchy recordings, like when the violin player takes the solo and the world is waiting for a sunset and Django is way in the back, and Django in the back is strumming faster than a hummingbird wing, and man, he can just make that thing swing. And then in I Saw Stars, how he's just chopping those strings in that mystic rhythm, and man, can't he just take you with him. Then when he steps out front in Nuage, each note drips out so sweet that maybe we think this sadness will be forever. But let him slip into a little boogie groove, like in Artillery Lord, oh let him speak it true, how sometimes the ammo's heavy, baby. Sometimes you just have to lay it on down.
Nice.
All right. Shawn, earlier you mentioned Lucille Clifton briefly, and I know that you have a poem for Lucille Clifton in your book. Do you have that handy?
I do. This I wrote within days of her passing. I just loved her work. It was musical, and it was expressive, and it was unapologetic, and I just loved her and everything that she did. This is called Dear Lucille, on the passing of Lucille Clifton. I would like to think that B.B. King named his guitar for you. I know he didn't. We in the know the myth, the real story. We know that it was not you whom he played to make music so sweet that I, a grown man, cry when I hear it. But I am comforted thinking it is so. Even though you did not need a man for making music, your wide hips spinning men like tops, we never doubted it for a second. And your words spinning out to the sky, because the pages could not hold them for long, Lucille, could not keep them silent, all black and white. Your words like you, bigger than what they lay upon, and They echo like you now that you're gone, so that sadness cannot take hold for long, Lucille. So that's that one.
I'm going to ask you one question, and then we're going to have everyone be able to ask you some questions if they want to. You know, all of the poems that you just read deal with music in one way or another, and poetry itself has a certain musicality that we all know. Could you talk to me a little bit about the relationship between music and poetry for you personally, and is there a push and pull between the two?
Yes, to answer the last question. Of course, there's a push and pull between the two. They're so closely related, I think. I mean, we study classical poetry, you know, that rhyming rhythmic verse that, you know, with those weird iambs and trochees and spondies and anapests and dactyls and all those weird little metrical feet that tap out different rhythms. And I think it's important for poets to know that stuff. I mean, to know poetics. With the advent of the internet, all that information's right at our fingertips. We can just look it up. But for people who like a voluminous tome, the Princeton Encyclopedia of Poetry and Poetics, I think should be on every poet's bookshelf. Because in there you learn how to turn words into music and how to use those devices to do different things. I don't write a lot of rhymed verse. I don't write a lot of metrical verse or anything like that, but it all finds its way into my poems. I'm always paying attention to sound. I'll rework a line until it sings. When I abandon a poem, it's when it stops singing to me, and I can't do anything else with it. We're done. But that relationship between music and poetry is very important to me, and I think it's important to most people who are paying attention to what the words are going to sound like in the air. I'm not saying that, I mean, because there's a lot of experimental poetry that I really dig that you couldn't read. I mean, some of E.E. Cummings's work is damn near impossible. That Grasshopper poem, for instance. I mean, half the poem is weirdly placed parentheses. You know, it's really difficult to do some of that stuff. But then, you know, you look at that poem that is this great little graphical, crazy, bouncing all over the page thing, and you think about, here's E.E. Cummings, who spent his entire life in New York City, fascinated by the idea of a grasshopper. Of course he is. He's maybe seen 3, you know? There aren't that many grasshoppers in Manhattan. Of course he's fascinated by them. Of course he's going to let that poem jump all over the page. You know, but even in there, visually there's kind of a music to it. I'm not explaining myself well, but I hope you get the idea. I think music and poetry are deeply entwined.
You're having fun, and so am I. And you know, one of my favorite poets in the world is the New Orleans poet Everett Maddox, and his first book was called the Everett Maddox Songbook, which everyone should try to find if they can. But I hope one day there's a Shawn Pavey songbook.
Now that would be fun. Yes. So what now?
With that, I'm just gonna tell everybody, if you want to turn off your microphones right now and talk to Shawn, maybe ask him a question or two, and then I will dive back into it. Nobody has any questions, we can keep going, but.
Hey, Shawn, it's Paul. I've got a
Yes.
question for you. We both love Philip Levine, and Levine said you've begun to separate the dark from the dark. So I'm really curious to ask you, did you have a poem or a couple of lines where you were like, shit, I just broke through something, and you started to see yourself differently?
Just a couple of lines? No. I've got an entire poem that came out of a 6-year dry spell. And it was when I was actually back at the North Carolina Governor's School as a teacher back in 2003 and 2004. I guess I could read that. It's long, but I'll try to get through it. But the reason I love your question, and the reason I thought about this poem immediately is I felt pathways in my brain opening up as I was writing this poem. Because it was about a meteor shower, and that I had witnessed with my roommate at the time. Both of us were poor as church mice. We couldn't afford, do things like go to a movie or even rent a movie. We were couch diving for change just to get a 6-pack of PBR. Let's see, there it is. It's called Leonid Meteor Shower with James. And at the time, this particular Leonid meteor shower was supposed to be the brightest meteor shower that we were going to see for another 90 years. Of course, everyone that comes after that, they say the same thing. So that kind of filters its way into this poem. You'll have to forgive me for hyperbole. It's a 4-part poem, first part. And it bounces all over the page too, kind of like a meteor shower. I don't know if you can see that. 1, our bodies clothed against air, cold enough to freeze water where it stands. James and I stand and look skyward to the northwest, sipping coffee in the dark of our yard. Crazy enough, we two, to watch rock burn in the sky as the matter and the atoms of the matter break down, component parts reassembling into something altogether new. 2, this we will not see again. 90 years will pass. We will not see this rain of rock, of fire, of ash, mingling with the air we breathe. We will not taste on our tongues burning sky, crackling energy, as steam from our breath swirls a silvered motion away from our bundled up selves. Big as fists, big as elephants' heads, as small as a grain of sand, meteors sizzle dark sky 2 hours before dawn. November's July 4th fireworks raining bright fire down on us. Incandescent particles exploding into air, connecting us to all that is in this infinite expanse where we spin in perfect symmetry. 3, 90 years will pass. Politicians will die. Captains of industry will die. Priests will die. And monks and James and me. Before meteors meet us again, lighting a dark night with embers, we will all die. 4, bringing fire, meteors will shimmer a dark sky. They will pour upon the earth, spread dusts from places we have not seen. They will come again out of darkness as before, when the world still steamed in the chill from its new birth. They will bring with them fire, a breath they will breathe into bones and dust and ash. They will breathe into the air, stain the sea, vapor into clouds, a fresh mattering. Who will stand in the cold dark then? Who will smell the fire in the night? Will they coat themselves against frost and ice, drink the black coffee of morning before light? Will they delight in a spectacle of fiery mists? Will they fix their eyes on heaven?
Awesome, awesome. Very Theodore Roethke to me there. I understand why that would make you feel changed and growing.
Right. Yeah, that poem was kind of a dam break moment for me. And I haven't had any kind of stretch that was that long, without writing again. And I've really tried hard to scribble at least something every day, even if it's trite or stupid or whatever. It's still something on a page. It might turn into something, it probably won't. But I'm still every day trying to do something. And even if I'm just filling up a Post-it note, something, trying to do something.
Does anyone else have anything they want to talk to Shawn about? If not, I'm going to ask you a question right now, Shawn, which is, when I worked full-time as a newspaper reporter covering gallery exhibitions most frequently, one of the things that I would always ask the curator or the artist, whoever else I was talking to, is, if I can go to any particular show I choose, why would I pick this show? And so what I'll ask you is, like, we have a lot of options in terms of what we read. Like, with your poetry and with your most recent book in particular, if we can read anything that's out there, why would you say that your work is something that people should pick up?
I hope. I try. I don't always succeed, but I really try to write poems that anybody at a superficial level could get. That they could say, yeah, okay, I understand that, or yeah, I see what he's saying there, or whatever the situation is. I try not to be so cryptic that people don't walk away from it and say, I don't understand. I don't always succeed. I mean, I get weird like everybody else, and sometimes things aren't going to make sense. Sometimes the poems don't even make sense to me. That's okay. We're putting language together in new and innovative ways. That's our job. But to answer your question, why should somebody pick up my book? Because I think they'll enjoy it. I think there's some good stories in there. There's a couple of good jokes here and there. There's a couple of love poems. I mean, there's stuff in there for everybody, I think. If you don't like the dark, twisty, angsty stuff, skip over that and find something else you like. But this book itself is kind of a greatest hits. It's a combination of the first two books and then a bunch of newer work on top of that. Just because, I wasn't going to pay to have those other books reprinted, and I wanted something to be able to take on the road when readings were, and that's how this book came about.
We had a question pop up for you in the chat here, which is Bob Phillips asked where you're originally from, where you grew up.
Oh, Bob, that's a tough question, man. My dad was with IBM, so it's a lot like being in the military. At the time, this was back in, I was born in '67, so this is basically in the '70s. We moved all over the place. IBM at the time, for everybody who was sort of in the family, was either stood for I've been moved, be moving. Nobody was anywhere for long. But so I was born in Maryland. Then we went to Kentucky for a year, Lexington, Kentucky, before Dad, knowing that we were going to Colorado, we were there for 8 years, and Dad got transferred to Charlotte, and then it was in Charlotte where he retired, but that's where I went to high school, was in North Carolina, or sophomore through senior years. That's where I went to college. That's where I lived for 20 years after getting out of school, until I came out here to Kansas City back in '06, I guess. So Bob, a very long involved answer to a very simple question. I don't know. I don't know where I'm from.
Shawn, I've got one for you if it's okay.
Sure.
So, the process of being a poet involves, different levels of involvement. You compose a poem. Hopefully you reach a point where maybe you see that poem published somewhere. And then also there's, taking your poems with you out on the road and delivering them to people. Can you talk about how you experience those different aspects of poetry differently? If one of those feels more valuable to you than the others, and maybe how each part plays into, that fulfillment that we try to get as poets?
Right. Well, I gave up on fulfillment as a poet a long time ago.
That's the quote.
I think that's a sucker's game. You're never going to find it. I was talking to a friend of mine in Kansas City, a very fine poet, much more on the academic side than maybe I am, but still crafts brilliant lines. Really, really good guy by the name of Cameron Morris, and he was disheartened by the scene and the publishing scene and the whole poetry scene in general, and I just had to take him aside and say, man, the scene sucks. The scene is always going to suck. Who cares? Do your work. And that's it. As far as what I find more valuable, I like to see my poems in a physical publication as much as anybody does. And I need to send more out to journals just to do that. John, looks like your screen's frozen.
I can hear you.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I was just making sure we were all still connected.
It was just my face that was frozen.
Gotcha. I have that effect on people. No, but to get back to the question, ultimately, I think the poem has to work on the page. So I think publication, to me, that's a validation. When somebody else chooses to print my work, that I find, whether it's an online publication or whether it's a dead tree journal, I don't care. If somebody else thinks that something I've written has value enough for them to devote their time to put it out to the world, I am always grateful when that happens, and always thrilled. I can't think of any one of us, most of us on this call are poets. I can't think of any of us who don't get a buzz out of getting an acceptance email or letter or what have you. That's just the way to spark up a good day. But getting out on the road, meeting new people, presenting my poems to new audiences, having new experiences, eating new Pittsburgh food, or whatever the situation may be, I'd love to get out on the road when I can afford to do so. It's a very costly thing. I've never ever once recouped my expenses, so that's why I set my poetry up as an LLC. I write all these things off my taxes. It helps soften the blow a little bit to get some of that back, but it does test the elastic on your credit cards.
They won't let me have credit cards, Shawn.
Well, they're stupid.
Not stupid enough.
They wouldn't let me have them for the longest time, and then I met somebody who kind of helped me straighten my life out, and now they keep sending me new ones. You know, it's like, here's another card with a $10,000 limit, but I don't want it.
I need to meet that person too, but if I do, it'll probably be a parole officer. So, but okay.
Well, there have been great fictional relationships between cons and parole officers, so you're in good company.
Mine will be a sweeping love story.
That's right.
So I guess I want to ask you a few more questions before we're done tonight. But would you like to read a few more poems?
Yeah, sure.
I'm sure that's, I like asking questions, but I'm sure that's what most people are here just to listen to you.
Okay. Well, since a lot of people on here were all my last Zoom reading, I'll skip some of the newer stuff that I've been throwing out and get back to stuff from the book. Let's see. Oh, this is an interesting one. Let's read that. I'm fascinated by space, like space travel. I'm also fascinated by page space and different ways to use it. But I'm, since a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. And when I lived in Colorado, we lived in Longmont, which is the home of Vance Brandt, and he commanded the Skylab missions. He also commanded a couple of shuttle missions. So we had our own astronaut. And so our little tiny town museum had all these on loan from Smithsonian, like space suits and all this cool Smithsonian level exhibit stuff in our tiny town museum that for the rest of it is, just filled with petticoats and wagon wheels, but there was this whole room, it was nothing but Vance Brandt space stuff. And I'd spend my summers bouncing between that museum and the public library. And to the point where I was such a regular at the museum, one of the curators there started talking to me and was impressed with my knowledge. I mean, I could tell you at that point in time, every astronaut, which mission they flew, what the dates of that mission were, what the mission objectives were. I mean, I can tell you all that stuff. I mean, I devoured it. So he put me on NASA's PR list. And so I was getting press packets from NASA, beautiful 8x10 glossies of the Skylab or any of that, all that kind of stuff, shuttle launch photos. And that was just the coolest thing for a 10-year-old kid to be getting, really cool pictures mailed to them from NASA. So anyway, I was always fascinated by space. And I was watching something or reading something about the, I can't find the poem now, there it is, about the Mars rovers. And I started thinking about it. It's like, well, maybe we've not set foot on Mars, but we've already sent them our trash. So we've already made our mark. We've littered up Mars already. This is called Tread Marks on Mars. So cold there and dry. Scientists know this, know it from data transmitted on radio waves from bits of metal and plastic blasted into space, hurtled to Mars. Hurled like so many stones at abandoned shack windows, hurled by children wanting a sound of shattering. Air is thin, but there is wind enough to brush tread imprints in red dust bare in time. How strange the hum of electric servos must sound whirring in such thin atmosphere. How drill bits eating old stone squeal, finding traces of water. Could be there were ponds of it, rivers of it, seas. There now, sky just leaks away, and we are there watching from here this heating, warring earth.
Nice.
Yeah. Shawn, I had a question for you from Ruth, who was listening, and she wanted to know whether or not you ever do performances of your poetry while playing music, your music.
Ultimately, that's the goal. One of the things I'm hoping to accomplish here in this artist residency is to come away from my time here having written an entire song with lyrics and be able to sing and play it at the same time. I don't know if I'm going to accomplish that, but that's one of my goals here. And but to answer your question, well, help me remember what your question was.
Her question, Ruth's question, was whether or not you musically perform along with your poetry at times.
Yes, ultimately that's what I want to do. The reason I started really seriously studying guitar and spending a lot of money on guitars and pedals and amplifiers and all these little whiz-bang gadgets that bring me so much joy is that I wanted to sort of create the Shawn Pavey rock and roll poetry roadshow and be able to play guitar and or play music and you know, do poems at the same time. I'm finding that's a very difficult thing to do, especially if you're reciting a poem. So what I'm working on is becoming an adept enough player where I'm not thinking about what my fingers are doing and just be able to create some sort of ambience in the background while presenting a poem. I don't know if I'll ever get there, but that's certainly a goal and something I want to do.
Well, you are a popular man, and I actually have two more questions that popped up here for you. Jennifer, who I assume is Jennifer Lemming, asked if she says, I'd like to ask Shawn if he thinks the next landing mission should be to the moon or Mars.
To the moon or Mars. I'll take either. Let's get out there, man. We were already at the moon. Let's at least try to get back there. That could be a staging ground for the Mars missions. Now I know Elon Musk is working hard to put people on Mars and bypassing the moon altogether. Part of me thinks that's a fool's errand. Another part of me is rooting for him wholeheartedly, even though he's Elon Musk and he's a capitalist jerk. You know, at least he's out there trying to do something that no government has attempted. I don't know. Say what you will. But yeah, so are we going to the moon or Mars next, or which landing should we do? The moon's closer. Let's try that. Let's perfect the technology before we send people to another, you know, to a completely different planet.
You know, they probably
let's get back to the moon and make sure we can do that and bring them back.
Name a movie.
They probably have plenty of hand sanitizer on Mars.
Yeah, it's called, if you take off your glove, it freezes and dies. That's what happens to your hand.
Something to look forward to.
Yes.
Okay, I don't know if BK is still on here with us. He said his internet connection is pretty unstable. You know, he wanted to know how you got started, which we already sort of talked about. So I'm going to move to the other part of his question, where he asks, what is your process writing a poem, and what is the driving force that moves you from one line to the next?
BK, if I ever figure that out, I'll let you know. A lot of times it's a line. A lot of times it's something I read, or maybe a piece of music sparks something, or I get a rhythm in my head and I put words to it and figure out what happens next. I kind of see BK's question here, and I just realized that there's a chat window.
I wasn't sure, because I'm a kind of a techno idiot with this stuff so far. I wasn't sure if you could see the chat window.
Right. Well, until I clicked on it, I couldn't.
Okay.
You know, very good question. How do I start? Well, usually it starts with an idea or an inkling, or sometimes I'll just start scribbling on a page until something starts to coalesce. I've been known to, if the blank page is giving me trouble, and lately the last couple of days, the blank page has been giving me trouble. So I'll take somebody else's line and put it at the top. So at least it's not blank anymore, and it's less scary. And then, so once I've got some ink on the page, then maybe I can throw my own words on there somehow. But a lot of times, you know, to try to break through that, because the blank page is scary. It's scary. You know, you've written all these poems in your life. Where's the next one coming from? So yeah, I mean, marking it up a little bit, putting somebody else's line on there, working from that. That's kind of how I start. Sometimes I start with an idea, sometimes I don't, and just stumble on one. But the driving force that moves one line to the next, I think, is by the time I get a line or two going, I start to feel the music of the poem at some point, and that's what drives the next line. I'm wanting, there's a trend. Mike James is brilliant at this, at writing these kind of surrealistic, weird lines that follow one after another, and they become this really magnificent thing. I don't know what any of it means, but I love it. And but then you look at his work deeper, and then you start seeing, well, there is a tenuous thread of it. It's very tenuous, and you got to dig for it sometimes. But it's there. There's a connecting thread from beginning to end. He's just going to take you on on Mr. Toad's wild ride to get you there. And so I'm kind of inspired by Mike to try some of that weirdness out and just come up with something crazy, and then follow it with something more crazy, and just see what happens. My problem is finding the first crazy thing.
Can I ask a question?
I wanted to say before you do that I fully intend to shame Mike James for not being here.
Absolutely.
Hey, this is his first day out of quarantine after being forced to take a business trip to Phoenix. He's out in the world. I'll give him a pass on this one.
That sounds like a shoddy excuse, but it's up to you. But yeah, Jennifer had asked, would you recite your poetry to an extraterrestrial settlement? And to that, I want to say, of course you would, because Shawn Pavey's not a racist.
I didn't hear the last word, John.
You're not a racist. Like, of course you would read to an extraterrestrial settlement.
Yes, absolutely. And I hope that they would understand it. Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the big thing. If we ever do find intelligent life and actually get to meet them, is trying to figure out how to talk to them. What was that movie with,
Jeremy Renner.
A couple years ago. Just a beautiful, weird little movie. Arrival? Was
Jeremy Renner. They had to have the linguist.
Yeah.
That Dennis Villeneuve guy, I think he did the Blade Runner sequel. Yeah. And it turned out it was us, right? In the future, and we came back. Those are the aliens were actually us.
Right.
The right one. But we needed a goddamn linguist. Whoever brings a fucking linguist into a sci-fi action movie, that's a
Right.
first.
Yeah. But and that's the thing that's always got me about the space program. They've sent senators, they've sent geologists, they've sent teachers, they've sent astrophysicists. They really need to send a poet. They need somebody to talk about the things that aren't numbers and equations. Somebody to talk about being in that emptiness.
I just have to say that I think we went over an hour without an obscenity until Jason Reaper.
I'm sorry.
I'm just shaming
Well,
him.
hey, it's Zoom. We don't have to worry about the FCC.
I'm really sorry about that.
That's all right. Okay. Let me see if I can.
I need a quick one.
Oh, go ahead.
Hey, Rob Dellinger.
Shawn, do you ever? I mean, I think you and I've talked about this before, but as far as inspiration and a starting point, do you ever find yourself responding to a poem that you love so much that you either kind of want to? I mean, personally, me, I find myself wanting to answer, like it's a correspondence, or God damn, I wish I'd written that. I'm gonna rewrite it, just as sort of a playful, creative exercise, and then something good kind of comes out of it every now and then. I mean, that's kind of a guilty thing. Maybe none of us should ever say out loud, but how can we not? Especially as a songwriter, and you know about the hit. I mean, I'm like, God, people are borrowing from each other all the time. Is that such a bad thing in our line of work? We're like, man, I'm gonna figure out how to rewrite your damn poem and not get caught or respond to it or answer it in some way, at least at the very moment to kind of.
How many people have written their own "So Much Depends" poem? You know, their Red Wheelbarrow poem, copy. I just wrote one the other day just for kicks and giggles, and I think we do that all the time. The way I learned how to write sonnets, I couldn't make them mean anything and still fit the form. So to get the form in my head and in my hands even, I would write complete nonsense that was metrically perfect. And the weird thing that happened in that exercise is eventually these, not what I called nonsense sonnets, they started making sense in a weird kind of way. And then all of a sudden I was writing sonnets. Now, my latest project is trying to tackle ghazals, it's a form that mystifies me. George Wallace makes fun of me because I can't write one, but I can't. I haven't written a successful ghazal yet. And I think what I'm going to have to do is take Mike James's ghazals and fill them with nonsense until I'm comfortable enough writing a ghazal that one will spring from my own feeble attempts. But to answer your question, Jason, yeah, we do that all the time.
I don't know anything about red wheelbarrows, Shawn, but I do know so much depends on a broken down farm truck.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you a question, which is like we're all trying to build a body of work, you know, that people can look back on, they can pick up. You know, for you, like I'm a poet of a certain age, you are too, we're about the similar age range. Is it, you know, do you keep working to build that body of work, or are you looking for that one big poem? I kind of think that a lot of us are looking for that one big piece a lot of the time.
I just want, yeah, I'd like a body of work, but I also want the big poem. Yeah, I want, yeah, I would love adulation if it ever came my way.
I think Shawn may be frozen now there for a second.
Cheap hobby.
Oh, there you go. So like, I would assume, do you feel like when people read your work, they without knowing it's yours, they could say this is a Shawn Pavey poem? Do you feel that?
Some of them, I think, yeah, maybe. I don't know if I have a formula. I'm kind of approaching things from a lot of different angles, and I don't know if there's a stereotypical Shawn Pavey poem. I think if there's any sort of common thread in my work, it's paying attention to rhythm and sound. But I don't know. I don't know if there's one thing that's distinctive about my work. If there is, I haven't noticed it yet. And that's what I'm looking for. I want to be. I would love for somebody to be able to, hey, that sounds like a Shawn Pavey poem, and actually mean it. Because I don't know what one poem is going to be. What from one poem to the next, I don't know what the next is going to be. It's back to that scary blank page idea. It's like, okay, so you've already written all these. Now what are you doing?
So I just have one more question for you, and then if you want to read another poem or two, and then everyone can just talk to each other. And my last question is this: what do you if someone were to read your poems and look at your body of work, what do you think your poems say about you as a human being on the earth?
Me as a human being on the earth.
Or maybe not on the earth, maybe on the moon.
Yeah, no. I think Earth is good. I don't think I'd pass the NASA physical. But I think the common trait, now let me back that up. What does my work say about me? It says I probably obsess over things more than I should. I think it probably, hopefully they'll find some of my humor in there. But I think ultimately I am fascinated by what's happening outside of my body. I'm fascinated by what's going on in the world. I'm fascinated by seeing new things. I spent 10 minutes before I got on tonight watching a rabbit here in the backyard just bounce around. And that rabbit may find his way into a poem one day. I don't know. Yeah, I hope that people look at my work and say, here's a guy who notices stuff.
That's cool. I definitely appreciate you talking to me today and getting to hear the poems. I'm going to let you read a few more poems, but I just want to take a second to, because this program that I'm kicking off is OAC Books Presents. So I want to thank Osage Arts Community because I put this together essentially for them. As a way to thank them for everything that they do. It's where I am, it's where you are, Shawn. And I also just want to say that the next event that I'm going to have as OAC Books Presents is likely going to be the release of the Gasconade Review, and hopefully, since we're online, I'll be able to get some of those contributors to take part. We always have such a hard time because we publish people all over the country, all over the world, and we can't have those people here with us. And, one of the only good things about this pandemic is that, more people are willing to come together in this format. So I will be announcing the date for that shortly. I just have to figure out a date in August that works, but that'll be for Gasconade Review 6, and hopefully people will tune in for that, and I'll just give it back to you, Shawn. And
Okay. Well, if nobody's offended by salty language, we could read the title poem. If somebody is offended, please speak up now.
I mean, your title poem involves chicken, so it really doesn't
It does
matter.
involve chicken. And what page is it on? That's always the question. That's the thing about when you release a fat book, you have to figure out where everything is. There it is.
I wanted to be Han Solo, but then I remembered my severe vertigo. I'm just helping you fill in the time there.
All right. Survival tips for the pending apocalypse. Know this. You can survive on a diet of bread, beans, and rice indefinitely. Just stock the basement with cases of Texas Pete hot sauce. Plant cabbage and carrots now for coleslaw because you can't descend into full-blown goddamn savagery just yet. Let some of that garden go to seed and store it all in a cool, dry space for next year. Load up the larder with as much white vinegar, vegetable oil, and black peppercorns as it can hold because you just can't trust mayonnaise. You can crack a peppercorn with a hammer if the pepper mill gives out. Oh, stock up on hammers. Acquire a rooster and some hens for the backyard and fence that fucker off high and tight. Don't be cheap with the razor wire, which can be found at any black site CIA prison or bad neighborhood title loan shop for next to nothing. Chicken is good, man, even when the rest of the world ain't. Lay in as much cracked corn animal feed as you can find because chickens gotta eat too, but save some for yourself in case you find yourself in a pinch. Stock up on 10-penny nails and $100 bourbon. Nails to fix the shit you know will break, and bourbon to fix the shit you can't. Get used to drinking $100 bourbon.
Yeah.
What about that $100 chicken, Shawn?
The $100 chicken?
Sure, plenty of it.
That's right. So we had enough?
I'd say one more, and then
Okay.
we're gonna just have everyone turn their mics off or still hear the want to, and we can just have a free-for-all conversation if anyone wants to talk beyond that.
Sounds good. I'm going to send this one out to my wife, who I got to see yesterday, and it was fantastic. And I didn't realize how much I missed her while I was here. And I miss her right now. So anyway, this is what I say to you after work for Naomi. It's just a bad day, darling. There have been others before this, and we're still here, still breathing, still waking up in the morning to do it all over again. I know. I know it has to get better. It will. Let's go for a walk and look at the maples in our neighborhood budding their fresh green leaves, shedding the whirligigs with their veined helicopter wings. Let's feel the warming spring Kansas breeze on our faces. Let it tussle our hair like a busy mother's touch. Let's leave the smartphones and the music players at home. Let's talk out the frustrations and the humiliations and the fuck-ups. Let's talk about planting flowers and tomatoes, playing guitars, grilling, inviting friends over, getting out of the house. Let's stop at the corner where the redbud ignites against the greening grass. Let's curse the dandelions, but enjoy the yellow. Let's give the bad day the attention it deserves, which really ain't much.
Thank you, Shawn.
Thank you, everyone. This is fun.
I'm just going to say my original intention was to record this reading for the OAC YouTube channel, but what I've decided to do in place of that is actually create a YouTube channel for OAC Books Presents. So it will go specifically on there. And if they want to transfer it on to their original channel as well, they can do that.
Sure.
But I want this series to have its own dedicated channel. So it's going to get.
I think it should. I think that'd be great. And I feel really honored to sort of be the inaugural guy.
It's true. You're our inaugural lonely man.
He's lonely up here in town.
And with that, everyone who's still here, if you have your microphone on, you can turn it off. I thank you for being here. I'm not going anywhere immediately. I don't think Shawn is. So if anyone wants to talk, feel free.
Thanks, guys. It's good stuff.
And thank you, Victor Clevenger, again for
Thanks, Paul.
allowing me to use the Zoom account. So.
Thanks, Vic.
Yeah, not a problem, guys.
All right. Well, if you guys, if everybody pretty much wants to depart, that's okay. I can stop this recording, which I think I'm going to do now anyway. We can still keep everything open without me recording it. So.
Well, I'm going to go find some other way to hide from Reverie, but all right. See y'all later.
Hey,
All right, Paul. Always good to see you, brother.
Paul, there are closets everywhere.
I'm in one. All righty. See y'all later. Bye.
All right.
Later, Paul.